The young boy started making strange hand signals, his eyes filled with fear. The stewardess could see that something was off, and her instincts told her to take action. But what happened next, as the plane touched down and authorities rushed to the scene, was something no one on board could have expected. Betty had always been a diligent and intuitive flight attendant. After more than a decade of experience in the skies, she had developed a keen sense for reading passengers and their moods. Her job wasn't just about serving drinks and ensuring safety. It was about creating a comfortable and secure environment for everyone on board. She had encountered her fair share of difficult situations, from medical emergencies to unruly passengers. But nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face on this particular flight. The journey from New York to Los Angeles was a routine one for Betty. She had flown this route countless times, and it usually passed without incident. But today, as she moved through the cabin during the pre-flight checks, something caught her attention that she couldn't ignore. In row 17 by the window sat a small boy who couldn't have been older than 7. His short brown hair was neatly combed, and he wore a green striped shirt that looked a bit too big for him. What drew Betty's attention, though, were the boy's hands. He was making strange, repetitive motions with his fingers, twisting them together in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if he was trying to communicate something. Betty paused for a moment, watching the boy from a distance. His eyes were wide and darted around the cabin nervously, never settling on anything for more than a second. He looked scared, and Betty's heart went out to him. She knew that flying could be a frightening experience for children, especially if it was their first time or if they were alone. But something about this situation felt different. The seat next to the boy was empty, but it was clear that someone had been sitting there. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the tray table, and a woman's coat was draped over the back of the seat. Betty scanned the cabin, trying to locate the missing passenger, but it wasn't until a few minutes later that she saw a woman making her way back from the restroom. The woman appeared to be in her late 30s with sharp features and a serious expression. She moved quickly, not making eye contact with anyone, and slid back into her seat beside the boy. As she did, the boy immediately stopped making the hand motions and turned to stare out the window, his small body tense. Betty's instincts kicked in. She had learned over the years to trust her gut feelings, and right now, everything inside her was screaming that something wasn't right. The boy's behavior was odd, and the woman's demeanor only added to her unease. She decided to keep a close eye on them as the flight progressed. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the cabin crew began serving drinks, Betty made a point to pass by row 17. The woman ordered a glass of wine, her voice clipped and unemotional, and then asked for apple juice for the boy. Betty handed over the drinks, her eyes lingering on the boy for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't look at her or acknowledge her presence in any way. He just stared out the window, his little hands now clenched into fists on his lap. Betty couldn't shake the feeling that the boy was in some kind of trouble. She decided to approach him again later, but she knew she had to be careful. Accusing someone of wrongdoing on a flight could escalate quickly, and without more information, she didn't want to make a scene. But she also knew that doing nothing wasn't an option. An hour passed, and Betty continued to monitor the boy and the woman from a distance. The boy remained silent, his gaze never straying from the window. The woman, meanwhile, seemed increasingly agitated. She fidgeted in her seat, checked her watch repeatedly, and occasionally leaned over to whisper something to the boy. Each time she did, the boy would flinch slightly, as if her words were causing him physical pain. Finally, Betty saw her opportunity. The woman got up from her seat and made her way to the restroom once more. Betty quickly grabbed a coloring book and a set of crayons from the supply cart and made her way over to the boy. She knelt down beside him, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hi there," she said softly. "I noticed you were sitting here all by yourself, and I thought you might like something to do. How about some coloring?" The boy glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't respond. His body remained tense, and his hands stayed firmly clenched on his lap. Betty placed the coloring book and crayons on the tray table in front of him, offering him a warm smile. "I'll be just over there," she said, pointing to the galley at the back of the plane. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask, okay?" The boy gave the slightest of nods, and Betty felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe she was getting through to him. But that hope was quickly dashed when the woman returned to her seat. She immediately noticed the coloring book and crayons and, without a word, picked them up and placed them in the seat pocket in front of her. The boy didn't protest, didn't even look up. He just continued to stare out the window as if he were somewhere else entirely. Betty's heart sank. She had hoped to win the boy's trust with the coloring book, but it seemed that the woman's influence over him was too strong. She needed to find another way to reach him, but she wasn't sure how. Back in the galley, Betty relayed her concerns to her colleague, Joanne. Joanne was the kind of person who always knew how to keep a cool head in any situation, and Betty valued her opinion. "I don't know what to do," Betty admitted. "Something just feels off about this whole thing. The boy seems terrified, and the woman is acting so strange." Joanne listened carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. "It does sound odd," she agreed, "but without knowing more, it's hard to say what's really going on. Have you considered just asking the woman if everything's okay?" Betty shook her head. "I thought about it, but I'm afraid it might make things worse. If she's doing something to hurt him, she's not going to admit it, and if I'm wrong, I just don't want to make things worse." Joanne nodded, understanding the delicate balance Betty was trying to maintain. "Maybe we should keep an eye on them for now," she suggested. "If anything else seems off, we can report it when we land." Betty agreed, but as the flight wore on, her unease only grew stronger. The boy remained withdrawn, and the woman's behavior became more erratic. At one point, she noticed the boy making those strange hand gestures again. His fingers twisted and turned in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost like he was trying to communicate in a way that only he understood. It was then that Betty realized the boy might be trying to signal for help. Her heart pounded in her chest as she considered the possibility. If he was in danger, she had to act. But she needed to do it in a way that wouldn't put him at further risk. Betty knew there was no time to waste. Discreetly, she made her way to the back of the plane and used the in-flight phone to call ahead to the airport security team. She explained the situation as best as she could, detailing the boy's behavior and the woman's concerning actions. The security team assured her they would be ready to intervene as soon as the plane landed. As the plane began its descent, Betty's anxiety reached a fever pitch. She could barely focus on her final duties as she prepared the cabin for landing. Her mind was consumed with worry. What if she was wrong? What if she had misinterpreted the boy's signals and the woman's behavior? But what if she was right and the boy was in real danger? The plane touched down smoothly, and as it taxied to the gate, Betty made an announcement asking all passengers to remain seated until further notice. The request was met with confused murmurs, but most of the passengers complied. Betty's colleagues, sensing the seriousness of the situation, helped enforce the directive, keeping everyone in their seats. As the plane came to a stop, the cabin door opened and a team of security officers boarded the aircraft. They moved quickly and quietly, making their way down the aisle towards the boy and the woman. Betty watched them approach, her heart in her throat. The woman's face paled as the officers reached her row. She tried to remain calm, but there was a flash of panic in her eyes. The officers asked her to step aside, and one of them knelt down to speak to the boy. Betty couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw the boy nod slightly, his eyes still wide with fear. After a brief conversation, the officers escorted the woman and the boy off the plane. Betty watched them go, her mind racing with questions. Had she done the right thing? Was the boy safe now, or had she just made a terrible mistake? Hours later, Betty received a call from the head of airport security. They thanked her for her vigilance and informed her that the boy was safe, but the situation was more complicated than it had initially appeared. The woman wasn't the boy's mother, but his aunt, and she had been caring for him after the death of his parents. The hand gestures the boy had been making were part of a coping mechanism he had learned in therapy to deal with his anxiety, and the woman's behavior, while harsh, was her way of trying to keep him calm during the flight. Betty felt a mix of relief and guilt. She had acted out of concern, but her actions had caused unnecessary stress for both the boy and his aunt. It was a difficult lesson, but one that she knew would make her a better flight attendant in the long run. As Betty prepared for her next flight, she carried the experience with her. She knew that her job required vigilance and that sometimes that meant making tough decisions. But she also understood that every situation was unique and that it was important to approach each one with empathy and understanding. The flight attendant's role was more than just ensuring the comfort and safety of passengers. It was about being attuned to the needs of others. And sometimes that meant stepping in when something didn't seem right. Betty had done what she thought was best, and while the outcome hadn't been what she expected, she knew that her actions had come from a place of genuine concern. In the end, Betty realized that she couldn't always predict the outcome of her decisions, but she could always strive to do what was right. The experience had humbled her, but it had also reinforced her commitment to her job and to the people she served. And as she boarded her next flight, she did so with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever challenges the skies might bring.